A branch manager at a bank in Santa Monica walked onto the floor, looked at the man sitting across from his teller, and overrode a $2.4 million wire transfer that was already in process. Not because the funds were insufficient, not because the account was flagged, not because there was a single piece of documentation missing, because the man initiating the transfer was wearing a gray hoodie and had arrived without an appointment, and did not, in the branch manager's immediate assessment, look like someone who had $2.4 million to send anywhere. The teller, 22 years old, 8 months into the job, 3 minutes from completing the transaction, sat at her desk and watched the manager take the keyboard and type the override code, and felt something happen in her chest that she would not be able to name precisely until several days later, when she would identify it as the specific sensation of watching an institution become a person's worst instinct. The man in the gray hoodie said nothing. He looked at the screen. He looked at the manager. He asked one question. He left. 48 hours later, the branch manager was no longer the branch manager, and the $2.4 million arrived at its destination, a documentary film fund for first-generation filmmakers in South Los Angeles, 39 hours and 14 minutes after it had been frozen, which was long enough to matter and short enough to be repaired. This is the story of what happened in between. There is a branch of Pacific Cornerstone Bank on Wilshire Boulevard in Santa Monica, California, 3 blocks from the ocean. It is a modest branch by the standards of its neighborhood, 6 teller stations, a small waiting area with 4 chairs upholstered in a gray-blue fabric that matches the carpet, a row of offices along the east wall with glass partitions and doors that close. The lobby is clean and well lit, and has the specific quality of a place designed to communicate reliability without communicating warmth, which is the design philosophy of most bank branches, and which most people accept as the natural condition of the places that hold their money. The branch handles a mix of personal and business accounts. The neighborhood brings in a reasonable volume of high-net-worth clients. Santa Monica's proximity to the entertainment industry and its general affluence mean that wire transfers of significant size are not unusual events here. The branch has a private client services room, separated from the main floor by a door with a keypad, for transactions that require more time or more discretion than the standard teller window. The private client services room was where the wire should have been processed. The man in the gray hoodie had not been directed to the private client services room. He had walked into the branch at 11:27 on a Tuesday morning, taken a number from the dispenser near the door, sat in one of the gray-blue chairs, and waited until his number was called. He had then walked to teller window 4 and explained what he needed. The teller at window 4 was a 22-year-old named Adriana Voss. She had been at Pacific Cornerstone for 8 months and was, by every measure available to her supervisors, doing well. She was careful, accurate, and had what her training supervisor had described as an instinct for the work, a quality of attention that made clients feel they were being handled correctly rather than processed. She had never made an error on a transaction above $50,000. She had handled 3 wire transfers in the high 6 figures without incident. She had begun the intake process for the $2.4 million wire at 11:31. The account was valid. The funds were present. The receiving institution was a registered nonprofit organization. The documentation, transfer authorization, purpose of funds, receiving account details was complete, organized, and presented on a phone screen with a clarity that suggested the man had done this before. She had entered the transfer details. She had completed the verification sequence. She had been 3 minutes from finalization when the branch manager appeared at her shoulder. His name was Gerald Ashworth. He was 58 years old and had been the branch manager for 6 years. You need to understand something about Gerald Ashworth before you understand what he did at 11:34 on a Tuesday morning. He had been in retail banking for 31 years. He had started as a teller at 27 in a branch in Glendale that no longer existed, and had worked his way through every position available in branch operations: teller, senior teller, personal banker, assistant branch manager, with a consistency that his personnel files described across 3 institutions and 6 supervisors as steady, reliable, detail-oriented. He wore a suit every day. Not an expensive suit. A good suit, well-maintained, the kind that communicated care rather than wealth. He had 4 of them and rotated them on a schedule. He had been doing this for 23 years, since a regional manager had told him, early in his career, that the way you dressed was the first signal clients received about whether they could trust you with their money. He had taken this seriously. He had grown up in Gardena, the son of a postal worker and a grocery store cashier, in a household where money was a practical matter, tracked carefully, discussed openly, never wasted. His parents had not had a bank account until he was 11 years old. Before that, the household finances had run on cash, on the specific economy of people who had learned to distrust institutions that had not always served people who looked like them. He had become a banker, in part because he had decided that the institutions could be different if the people inside them were different. That the trust his parents had not been able to extend to banks could be something he spent his career earning for a different generation. This was not a small motivation. It had driven 31 years of careful, consistent work. It had also, without his fully noticing, calcified into something that had a flaw in it. The flaw was this: Gerald Ashworth had spent 31 years learning to read clients, to assess, quickly and reliably, who they were and what they needed and whether the transaction they were requesting was consistent with that assessment. He had developed, in those 31 years, a picture of what different kinds of clients looked like. And he had been right often enough that the picture had become a tool he used automatically, without examining it, the way you use any tool that has rarely let you down. The picture had a specific gap in it. The gap was the same gap that most pictures like this have. It was not a gap he had drawn deliberately. It was a gap that had formed over 31 years from the aggregate of who had walked through his branch doors and what they had looked like and what they had turned out to need. The picture had been accurate, statistically, more often than not. What the picture had never accounted for was the man in the gray hoodie. 3 years earlier, Gerald had processed a transaction for a man who had presented impeccably, suit, tie, a briefcase with his documents organized by category, and who had turned out to be initiating a fraudulent transfer from a compromised business account. The fraud had been caught, eventually, by the fraud department, but it had been initiated in Gerald's branch, on Gerald's floor, past Gerald's eye. The investigation had cleared him of wrongdoing, but the specific feeling of having been read so completely wrong, in the direction he least expected, in the direction of trust rather than suspicion, had embedded itself in a specific location and had not moved. He had become, in the 3 years since, more cautious. More cautious meant, when something felt inconsistent with his picture, he intervened. He had intervened 14 times in the 3 years since the fraud. 12 of those interventions had been correct, genuine inconsistencies, transactions that warranted additional review. 2 had been incorrect, and in both cases he had caught himself before the intervention became visible to the client and had found a way to complete the transaction without the client knowing he had questioned it. This was the 3rd incorrect intervention. He would not catch himself in time. At 11:33, he had been walking to the coffee station when he had glanced at window 4 and seen the figure on the screen, $2,400,000, and looked at the man across from Adriana, and looked back at the screen, and arrived at his picture in under 4 seconds. Gray hoodie. Worn dark jeans. A phone on the desk rather than a portfolio or a briefcase. No appointment. No private client request. He walked to the window. Adriana was 3 fields from completion when she felt Gerald at her shoulder. She did not hear him arrive. She became aware of him the way you become aware of weather, a change in the atmosphere that registers before any specific sensory input. She looked up. Gerald was looking at the screen. "I'm going to need to review this one," he said. To her, not to the client. Adriana looked at the screen. Everything was in order. She had checked it twice. "The documentation is complete," she said. She said it quietly. "I understand," Gerald said. "Please step aside." Adriana looked at the man across the desk. He was in his early 50s, with a patient face and dark eyes that were currently looking at Gerald with a specific quality of attention that watches something carefully and waits for it to become clear. He said nothing. She stepped aside. Gerald sat in her chair. He looked at the screen. He looked at the documentation on the phone, the transfer authorization, the receiving account details, the purpose statement, Documentary Film Fund, South LA First Generation Filmmakers Initiative, second tranche, fiscal year disbursement. He looked at the man. "I'm going to need to put a hold on this transaction while we verify the account details." The man looked at him. "The account details have been verified," he said. Adriana completed the verification sequence. "I understand. We have additional verification requirements for transfers of this size. I've made transfers of this size from this branch before." Gerald looked at him. He absorbed this. He did not look at the transaction history on the screen, which would have shown him the previous transfers and confirmed the statement. "I'm going to need 48 hours, he said. 48 hours. The man said. "That is our policy for large transfer review." The man looked at Gerald. He looked at Adriana, who was standing 2 feet to the left with her hands at her sides and an expression that was professional and doing a great deal of work to remain so. He looked back at Gerald. "The fund's disbursement window closes in 56 hours, he said. "The filmmakers have been waiting for this tranche since March. Several of them have production commitments that depend on it." He said it plainly, without heat, as information. Gerald looked at the screen. "I understand," he said. "I will expedite the review where possible." The man was quiet for a moment. "What triggered the hold?" he said. "Standard review protocol." "That's not what I asked." The lobby had gone quiet around them. The 2 other tellers were working but not talking. The client at window 2 had stopped counting his deposit. "Mr." Gerald started. "What triggered the hold?" the man said again. Still quiet. Still without heat. Still the same patient expression, not the policy name. "What triggered it?" Gerald said nothing. The silence lasted long enough. "All right," the man said. He picked up his phone from the desk. He stood. "I'll be back in 48 hours, he said. "The fund's administrator will be in contact." He looked at Adriana. "Thank you for your help." He walked to the door. He pushed through it. He stood on the sidewalk on Wilshire Boulevard for a moment. Then he took out his phone and made one call, brief and quiet, with his back to the street. Inside, at window 4, Adriana Voss stood and looked at the frozen transaction on the screen and felt, with a clarity that was unusual for someone who had been doing this for only 8 months, that she had just watched something happen that should not have happened. She looked at Gerald. Gerald was already walking back toward his office. She sat down at her station. She looked at the screen. She looked at the amount. $2,400,000. Frozen. She thought about the filmmakers in South Los Angeles who had been waiting since March. She picked up her phone. The call Adriana made was to the branch's regional operations manager, whose name was Catherine Park, and whose office was in a building in Century City, 11 miles east. She had met Catherine Park once, during a branch compliance training 6 months earlier, and had been given a card and told that if anything procedural ever seemed unclear, she should feel free to reach out. She had not expected to reach out this soon. She described the transaction in the order it had happened. The documentation, the verification, the override, the hold. Catherine Park listened without interrupting. The client's name, she said, when Adriana finished. Adriana looked at the transaction record on her screen. She read the name. There was a pause on Catherine's end that was slightly longer than a processing pause. "Is he still in the branch?" Catherine asked. "He left about 4 minutes ago." Another pause. "Adriana," Catherine said, "you did the right thing calling me. Do not close out of that transaction. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She was there in 33. She came through the branch door in a dark blazer with a laptop bag over one shoulder and the specific economy of movement of someone who has been in situations before and is managing this one from the moment she arrives. She went to Gerald's office first. She knocked once and went in and closed the door. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Adriana could see it through the glass partition. She could not hear it. She could read it. Catherine had the kind of face that showed its work in situations like this, not dramatically, but in the specific compression of someone who is asking a series of questions and receiving a series of answers that are each individually defensible and collectively indefensible. Gerald had the face of a man who had spent 31 years being correct and was in the process of understanding that being correct was not what this conversation was about. At one point, Catherine turned her laptop to face him. She had pulled the transaction history. Gerald looked at the screen. The previous 2 transfers of comparable size from this account, one for $1.8 million, one for $2, $1 million, were both documented, both completed, both processed without incident. Both, Adriana would learn later, had been handled on days when Gerald was not in the branch. Gerald looked at the screen for a moment. He closed his eyes. He was quiet for a long moment. Catherine said something. He opened his eyes. He said something back. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Then, she came out of the office. She crossed the floor to Adriana's station. "The hold is being lifted," she said. "I'm processing the release now. The transfer should complete within the hour." She looked at Adriana. "You did your job correctly today. I want that on record." "Thank you," Adriana said. "One more thing," Catherine said. She looked at Adriana's screen, at the purpose statement. Documentary Film Fund, South LA First Generation Filmmakers Initiative. She was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been here?" 8 months. "And you called me?" "Yes," Catherine looked at her. "I want to talk to you next week," she said. "About your development track." She went back to the processing station. The transfer released at 2:14 in the afternoon. Gerald Ashworth spent the rest of the day in his office, with the door closed. Keanu came back to the branch at 9:47 the following morning. Not because he needed to. The transfer had completed. Catherine Park had sent a written apology through the bank's client relations channel. The fund's administrator had confirmed receipt of the funds at 3:22 the previous afternoon and had confirmed that the disbursement window had been met. He came back because he had said he would. He came back because of the filmmakers, but also because of the teller at window 4 who had been standing 2 feet to the left with her hands at her sides, and because of the specific expression on Gerald Ashworth's face when he had asked what had triggered the hold, and Gerald had said nothing. He had said nothing. That was the answer. The branch was quieter at 9:47 on a Wednesday morning. 2 tellers on the floor, Gerald in his office, Adriana at window 4. He took a number. He waited. He walked to window 4. Adriana looked up. He said, "Thank you for what you did." She looked at him. "How do you know what I did?" she said. "Catherine told me," he said, when she sent the apology. Adriana absorbed this. "I just called the person I was supposed to call," she said. "Most people don't," he said. "Most people decide that calling the person they're supposed to call is more complicated than it's worth, or that it's not their place, or that the manager probably had a good reason." He looked at her steadily. "You called in 8 months. That's faster than most people call in 8 years. Adriana looked at the counter. "The filmmakers," she said. "Were they all right?" "The disbursement window met," he said, "by 17 hours. She let out a breath. "Good," she said. It came out more plainly than she intended. Not professional. Just good. He looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes, when you were sitting at this desk and he overrode the transaction, what did you think was happening?" She was quiet for a moment. She thought about the careful answer. She gave the honest one. "I thought he looked at you and made a decision," she said, "before he looked at anything on the screen." She paused. "I've seen him do intake on clients before. He reads people before he reads the documentation. Usually he's right. But the order is wrong." "The order matters," Keanu said. "Yes. Why?" She thought about it. "Because when you read the person first," she said slowly, "you're reading the documentation to confirm what you already decided, and if you already decided, you find a way to make the documentation say what you want it to say." She paused. "But if you read the documentation first, the documentation tells you what to see." He looked at her. "That is exactly right," he said. "That is the entire thing." She looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. Why did you come back?" The transfer cleared. "You didn't have to. I said I would," he said. She looked at him. "But also," he said, "because Gerald is in that office, and I think he is having a very difficult morning, and I wanted to see if there was anything worth saying." Adriana looked at the glass partition. Gerald was at his desk. He was doing something on his computer. His posture was the posture of a man who was performing normalcy. "Is there?" Adriana said. Keanu looked at the office for a moment. "I don't know yet," he said. "Let's find out." He looked at her. "Thank you," he said again, "for the order of operations." He walked to Gerald's door and knocked. Gerald looked up. He looked at the man in the gray hoodie. His face did several things in sequence, none of which he fully controlled. "Come in," he said. Keanu came in. He sat in the client chair across the desk. He did not wait to be invited. Gerald closed the laptop. "I owe you an apology," Gerald said. He said it immediately, without preamble, the way someone says something they have been rehearsing and have decided to say before they talk themselves out of it. "I know," Keanu said. "I made an assumption." "You made several," Keanu said. He said it without cruelty, as a precise account. Gerald was quiet. "Tell me what happened," Keanu said. "Not the policy. What happened inside?" Gerald looked at his desk. He told him about the fraud 3 years ago. The impeccable suit. The briefcase with the organized documents. The transfer that had turned out to be wrong in a direction he had not seen coming. the adjustment he had made afterward. He told it without making himself the victim of it. He told it accurately. "I built a correction," he said, "that overcorrected." He paused. "I started trusting people who looked like I expected them to look, and questioning people who didn't." He looked at his hands. I told myself it was caution. It was not caution. "No," Keanu said. "It wasn't." "What was it?" Gerald said. He asked it as a genuine question. The question of a man who has a name for something and wants to know if the name he has is the right one. Keanu looked at him. "It was a story," he said, "about what safety looks like, about what a person who belongs in a certain situation looks like." He paused. "The suit had told you a story about the fraud, so you stopped trusting the story the suit told, but you replaced it with another story about what legitimate looks like. And you trusted that story just as automatically." Gerald said nothing. "The fraud was not about the suit," Keanu said. "The suit was incidental. The fraud was about the documentation and the account, which your process is designed to examine." He looked at him. "The documentation and the account are the story. The rest is noise." Gerald looked at the desk. "The filmmakers," he said, "in South Los Angeles. Yes, they were waiting since March. Yes, for 17 hours margin. Yes." Gerald was quiet for a long moment. "I have been doing this for 31 years, he said. "I started because I wanted to be the kind of banker that my parents did not have access to, who treated people correctly regardless of," he stopped, "regardless of how they looked." He stopped. The sentence had arrived at where it needed to arrive. "Yes," Keanu said quietly, "that's the thing." He let it sit. "You have done this for 31 years, he said. "You have served thousands of people correctly. What happened yesterday is one transaction. It is not the whole of what you are." He looked at Gerald directly. "But it is something you are going to have to sit with. And the sitting has to be honest." Gerald looked at the closed laptop. "Catherine is reassigning me," he said. "Compliance review and training. Away from the floor." "I know. Did you ask her to?" Keanu looked at him. "I told her what happened," he said. "The decision was hers." Gerald nodded. "It's the right call," he said. He said it simply, not performing acceptance, actually meaning it, in the way that people mean things when they have had 18 hours to think and have arrived at the truth. "Yes," Keanu said. He stood. He extended his hand. Gerald looked at it. He took it. "The filmmakers," Gerald said. "The first generation program. Is there a way to see the work?" Keanu looked at him. "The fund hosts screenings," he said, "twice a year in South LA. He paused. "I'll send you the information." He said it simply, not as a performance of grace, as a thing he would actually do. He left the office. Adriana watched him walk out of Gerald's office. He stopped at her window on the way to the door. "He'll be all right," he said. Eventually, she looked at the office. Gerald was at his desk, not performing normalcy anymore. Just sitting. "Was it hard?" she said. "Going in there?" He thought about it. "No," he said. "The hard part was watching you stand 2 feet to the left with your hands at your sides while someone used your station to do something wrong." He looked at her. "That's the part I came back to fix." She looked at him. "It wasn't fixable," she said. "Yesterday, no," he said. "Yesterday wasn't. Today is." He picked up his phone from the counter. He looked at her. "The development track," he said. "Whatever Catherine offers you, take it." He walked to the door. He pushed through it. He stood on Wilshire Boulevard for a moment in the November light, which was doing something specific to the ocean 3 blocks away, a particular brightness that Pacific light makes in the late morning. The kind that makes the city look briefly like it was built to deserve it. Then, he walked to his car. The branch behind him was already moving, the morning's business resuming, the two tellers working, Gerald's office visible through the glass, and Gerald inside it, doing something that looked, from the street, like the first pages of a longer reckoning. Gerald Ashworth spent 4 months in the Compliance Review and Training Division. He did not resist it. He had said it was the right call, and he had meant it, and he continued to mean it through the 4 months, which were not easy months. He reviewed procedures he had written. He sat in training sessions he had facilitated. He read incident reports from other branches. Transactions flagged, transactions frozen. The pattern of what triggered review, and whether the triggers were what the policies said they were, or whether they were something else. He found, in those 4 months, that his case was not singular. It was not common. But it was not singular. He wrote a report. It was 41 pages. It identified the gap between stated policy, documentation first review, and operational practice, which in several branches, under several supervisors, had developed into something more instinctive and less documented. It proposed specific changes to training, to oversight, and to the review process for large transfers. Catherine Park read it over a weekend. She called him on a Monday morning. "This is very good," she said. "I had time," he said. "It's not about the time," she said. "It's about seeing it clearly." She paused. "Have you seen it clearly?" He thought about the suit, about the fraud, about the correction that had overcorrected across 3 years. "Clearly enough," he said. "I don't think you see these things fully. I think you see them enough to do the work, and then you keep working, and you see a little more." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "That's the right answer," she said. He went back to the floor in the spring. A different branch, Eagle Rock, east of downtown, a neighborhood that was different from Santa Monica in the ways that mattered, with a client base that required. Every day, the version of banking that he had originally come to this career to provide. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. What was different now was the order. Documentation first. Always. Then the person. The documentation told you what to see. He thought about that sentence regularly. He had not invented it. A 22-year-old teller at Window 4 had. He sent her a note when he got to Eagle Rock. 3 sentences. He had done the work correctly. She had done hers. He hoped she was well. She was well. Adriana Voss accepted Catherine Park's offer of a development track interview in December. By the following March, she was in a commercial banking associate program that Pacific Cornerstone ran for high-potential branch staff. By the following November, she was a personal banker. By the spring after that, she had her first business client, a small production company in Culver City, whose principal had been referred by a fund administrator who had mentioned, in passing, that the woman at Pacific Cornerstone who handled accounts for arts organizations was someone worth knowing. She handled 3 wire transfers in that first year for the South LA Documentary Fund. She processed all of them correctly. Each time, she read the documentation first. Then, she looked up. The filmmakers, in the spring cycle of the South LA First Generation program, screened 4 short documentaries at a community space in Compton. One of the filmmakers, a 23-year-old named Delia Torres, whose film was about her grandmother's experience as a domestic worker in Beverly Hills over 40 years, attended the screening and address her mother had sewn for the occasion. She had been waiting for the second tranche since March. The second tranche had arrived 39 hours and 14 minutes after it had been frozen. She had made her film. It ran 22 minutes. When the lights came up, the room was quiet for a moment, in the way rooms are quiet when something true has been shown in them. Then someone started clapping, and it did not stop for a long time. Delia Torres stood at the front of the room with the specific expression of a person who has made something and is now watching other people receive it, which is one of the most vulnerable positions a human being can be in, and which Delia was inhabiting with a composure that her grandmother, sitting in the third row, recognized as something she had passed down. Keanu was in the fourth row. Gray hoodie. He clapped with everyone else. He did not stay for photographs. He did not seek out Delia afterward. He watched her talk to her grandmother for 11 minutes after the Q&A, and then he left. He was in his car when his phone showed a message from Catherine Park. Thought you'd want to know. Adriana processed her third wire for the fund today. Everything in order. Documentation first. He looked at the message. He drove home. I keep coming back to the order. Documentation first. Then the person. It sounds like a procedural rule. It sounds like something from a training manual. And it is. It is literally in the Pacific Cornerstone Training Manual, on page 14 of the Large Transfer Review Protocol, in language that is dry and specific and has been there for years. But a 22-year-old at a teller window had watched what happened when the order was reversed, and she had understood what it meant. Not procedurally, but philosophically. When you read the person before you read the documentation, you are not doing due diligence. You are looking for confirmation of what you have already decided, and confirmation is not the same thing as verification. Gerald Ashworth knew this. He had known it for 31 years. He had come to banking because he believed in it, because he had grown up in a household where the institution had been unavailable, and he had wanted to be part of making it available. He had carried that intention for 3 decades. And then one fraud, in one suit, had tilted the order. Slowly, without his noticing. Until the order was not documentation first, but person first. And the person he was reading was not the documentation, but a picture he had built without examining it. One suit had tilted it, and a gray hoodie had revealed it. I do not think Gerald Ashworth is a bad man. I think he is what most of us are. A person with a genuine intention and a blind spot that grew in the space between the intention and the practice. The intention was real. The blind spot was also real. Both of those things can be true. What I find hardest to sit with is the 17 hours. Delia Torres had her film made. The funds arrived in time, by 17 hours. And those 17 hours existed only because Adriana Voss, 8 months into the job, picked up a phone and called the person she was supposed to call. Faster than most people do it in 8 years. If she doesn't make that call, no film. Not because Delia wasn't talented. Not because the work wasn't real. Because a wire transfer sat frozen in a system for 48 hours and nobody inside the institution moved it until someone from outside the institution asked the right question in the right room. These things happen every day in banks and in offices and in buildings where procedures are written on page 14 of a manual and people are working hard and meaning well and getting the order wrong without knowing it. They happen quietly. They happen to people who are not Keanu Reeves, to people who do not have a Catherine Parks card to give to someone, to Delias who do not make their films. That is the part I cannot resolve. I keep coming back to it. The 17 hours that were barely enough, multiplied by every quiet transaction that never gets reviewed, every Adriana who doesn't make the call, every filmmaker who waits past March and doesn't make it through the window. I do not know what to do with that. I know what Adriana did with it. Documentation first. Then she looked up. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves's well-known commitment to supporting independent film and arts education. and by the quiet work of the people inside institutions who maintain the order when it is easier not to. If something in it stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me about the 17 hours in your own life, the margin that was barely enough, or wasn't. If you know someone who picks up the phone when it matters, who reads the documentation before they read the room, share this with them. They are holding more than they know. Subscribe. There are more stories coming. See you in the next one.